Let's watch the first few minutes and see if we're invested enough to keep watching.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon.
Hi,
Thank you
Ian.
all for coming out. It's a pleasure to be here in Malmö. This is my first time in the city. I've been enjoying it very much and look forward to the rest of the week ahead. Let's get into it. So, as Marianne mentioned, I'm here to talk about what we've learned and how some of our design philosophies have changed over the last years, and how we're excited about how that sets us up to continue our live service for many, many years to come. Hopefully, this isn't just a talk for WoW fans, but is something that people who are thinking about any type of game development on an ongoing live service can take something away from. So just to start with some of the boring stuff before we get into the more interesting material, just want to talk a little bit about my own background. So I have been at Blizzard for 17 years. I've been working on World of Warcraft for 17 years, and that's been my journey in the industry. So you could say I'm a little bit of a specialist. I became game director in 2016, and I was on the World of Warcraft team, though, since 2008. I started off doing systems design and encounter design, worn a lot of hats over the years, but I would say I'm probably a systems designer kind of at my core. Prior to coming to Blizzard and how I got into the games industry, also a bit of an unusual background. I actually went to law school. I graduated from law school in 2004, thankfully just a few months before World of Warcraft came out. Otherwise, that might have been a bit of a different home to lead raids with my guild every evening. I ran a large community site and a pretty successful guild at the time, and through doing that, was able to connect with people who worked at Blizzard.
What guild was Ian in? Was it Blood Legion? I always forget that, but he was like an OG classic WoW PvE Giga Chad. Oh, it was Elitist Jerks. Yeah, Elitist Jerks. Okay.
Give them feedback, and I had a couple of people in my guild who got jobs at the company, and eventually I had this incredible opportunity come up, and I made a very large career transition in my late 20s. And I've never looked back, and it's really been just the honor of a lifetime to go from playing this game to helping craft its future.
So that is something that you guys might not know about the Blizzard employees. So many of them that I know are all former WoW players. A lot of like my friends that I've gamed with over the years, not a lot of them, but many of them now work at Blizzard for, QA or for balancing PvP or systems or whatever it is. And a lot of the PvEers like Ian back in 2004 got hired, and then Chris Kaliki, he has a similar story where he was a WoW player, had a lot of good feedback, and then he eventually got hired. So a lot of WoW's hires, not just recently, but like throughout their entire history, are like, let's hire the people that are playing our game at like a high level and bring them on board and see if we could see how we can make the game the best it can be. Like that's kind of like been their philosophy, which I find really kind of funny for a couple of reasons, but primarily because you step into a job interview and they're probably like, so what are your in-game achievements? How many job interviews are asking you about your World of Warcraft in-game achievements besides literally Blizzard, right? It's just kind of funny, yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit as well about where World of Warcraft is today. I assume everyone has just some basic level of familiarity with what the MMO is, but it's changed a lot in the last few years, and it's a very different game in some ways than it was 20 years ago when it all began. Back in 2004, there was World of Warcraft. Today, we have the continuation, the ongoing evolution of that game in the form of our War Within expansion that released last summer. That is our 10th expansion pack to World of Warcraft. But we also have a classic version of the game that we re-released in 2019 that is a recreation of that original 2004 experience, and we've continued to evolve that, offering classic versions of subsequent expansions as well. We've also had some experimental content in the classic space, adding new content, building upon that original foundation. All of these experiences have their own sub-communities, but they're all part of the larger World of Warcraft community and the World of Warcraft game that I'm going to talk about today. So again, just a quick rundown of sort of the business structure of WoW. WoW remains a subscription game. It's €13 a month. And that sub now includes access not just to the original ongoing version of WoW, but all of the classic versions that I just mentioned. We patch the modern version roughly every couple of months, with major updates every 6 months. And we sell an expansion pack every 2 years or so, which offers a big power reset, a whole new setting, major changes to the game. Alongside this, we have an online shop with microtransactions and mostly cosmetics and some paid convenient services like renaming your character or changing realms. But really, the core of our business is and always has been this subscription model. And I have to say, as a designer, as a game developer, it's a huge honor and really it's a privilege to be able to work in that model, because I feel like it aligns our motivations, our business motivations, with players' motivations. And it lets us really just focus on keeping our community happy, because we all succeed by making a game that is as fun as possible for as many people as possible for as long as possible. And that's the end of it. There have been some changes to the structure of kind of how World of Warcraft systems and gameplay have worked over the years, to say the least. Originally, World of Warcraft always had this reputation as a game that requires a huge amount of time to really, dedicate yourself to. There's still tons to do, but leveling is a much faster process. It's literally 10 times as fast just to jump in as a new player and get to the end game compared to where we were 20 years ago. But there is so much more to do in that end game. We have solo activities, single-player questing, long-form narrative stories, repeatable content there. We have a wide variety of solo, small group, and large group experiences. Delve's a new feature we just added, as well as dungeons and raids. And you can do this pretty casually or at a very hardcore competitive level, depending on your skill. We have PvP, small group and large group as well. We have systems that encourage playing multiple characters and really support it in a way that the game didn't used to. And for many players
A lot of people are asking what video is this. I'll just pause briefly. Someone in the chat linked it to me. This is streamed 2 days ago from Nordic Game Conference, I guess. Nordic Game Day 1 live from a theater stage. So that's what it is. I'm just watching. It's so not live, but it was from recent.
Today, this is actually a primary play style of theirs. They have dozens of characters that they just level and enjoy and almost build out their collection. And speaking of collections, we have 20 years worth of stuff to collect, thousands of achievements, cosmetics, and more. And we have role-playing communities that have been around, again, for 20 years and are part of World of Warcraft. Now, I list all of this out because all of these diverse experiences make up the experience of playing World of Warcraft today. I sometimes joke that you could have a dozen serious WoW players sitting around a table. You could ask them what it is that they do in WoW and why they play it, and you'd hear a dozen different answers. And I think that's exciting and awesome when we think about maintaining a diverse living world. It also makes our lives very challenging at times, because there are so many different interests and play styles and desires that drive the feedback that we hear in the community that we need to serve. Okay, now getting into the meat of things a little bit.
A recent change
5 years ago, I was actually scheduled to give a talk at GDC 2020 reflecting on the first 15 years of World of Warcraft and design lessons learned along the way. Obviously, for obvious reasons, that 2020 talk didn't materialize, but in the course of preparing for this, I was looking back at my old notes, and one of the things that struck me almost immediately was that I actually no longer agree with a lot of the things that I was planning to say back in 2020.
That's crazy, yeah.
It's not that there were specific designs I was talking about that I now think were bad, but rather that the lens through which I was viewing a lot of these questions and a lot of these problems was a very different one back then.
Interesting. I wonder what specifically.
I've been game director for a few years, and I was still viewing this in the context of design problems and through a very traditional design direction lens. I think when you think about game direction, design direction, creative direction, a lot of that traditionally involves having a vision that you put out there and kind of shepherding a large project, a team, many changes through that vision and ensuring that the game stays on track and largely aligned with what is meant to be at its core. And when I became game director, that was certainly the charge that was given to me by my predecessors. I had spent years learning why we made the decisions we made, what our philosophies had been since 2004, and my like solemn responsibility taking over the reins of this game was to continue that lineage forward. Something that honestly freaked me out a little bit as someone who'd been playing the game since day one, was this responsibility and the fear that if I made the wrong decision, I might somehow steer this game off this track that it had been on and might somehow damage this pillar of the online gaming industry. But that's, one approach. I think when you look at, and when I look at the community that we have and how that's evolved over the years, what I began to ask myself is whether that static vision is really the best way of serving an evolving community. And maybe what you need to do instead is to be able to evolve that vision, to be flexible with that vision to suit the times. And that rather than focusing on what are the right design principles or what are the wrong design principles and trying to solve an objective problem, it's more about asking how you meet players where they are and how you serve your community in the best way that you can and how you change and grow along with them. And so this talk is ultimately the story of how I got from point A to point B and that shift in perspective and what that's meant for the team as a whole that's come along on that journey.
So we talked about this just recently. Someone in the chat said, I'm new to WoW. What's the difference between like War Within and Classic? And I feel like Ian just summarized it very well. Classic is a traditional design direction. It's like that true vision of World of Warcraft, how it was back then. Minimal, very minimal changes. There are some changes, but very minimal. And it's like, this is that traditional design direction from 2004. And then you have retail, which is evolving your vision to meet their needs. Retail is constantly changing. There's new content being added, new raids, new experiences, new, right? And with that is good and bad, right? With novelty, you uncover a lot of great new things. I mean, at some point we didn't have Mythic Plus, right? We had Mist of Pandaria challenge modes. At some point we didn't have Arena, right? Back in Classic. And so novelty is really good to some degree. But I guess my point is, if you're a player and you're trying to decide, should I play retail or classic or maybe both, that's kind of like a good distinction. Like, do you want novel, difficult content? And when I say difficult, I mean content that can scale in difficulty. Like you have Mythic raids and Mythic Plus infinitely scaling. So you have arenas, stuff like that. Or do you want that more traditional game design, right, where it's like that MMO? Anyway, I think he just made that distinction pretty well, and we just talked about it, so I thought I'd break that down.
And that shift in perspective and what that's meant for the team as a whole that's come along on that journey and for our community today. So just to reflect on some of the history of the game over the last decade. In the 2010s, World of Warcraft had been around for quite some time, was really reaching some of the mature stages of an online game. Had to figure out how to expand a lot of their systems, how to add new content, how to keep the game growing. And a lot of those original designs weren't necessarily holding up in that context. And this is something that the design team spent a lot of time reflecting on back then. For example, they looked at just what seemed like just a lot of bloat in our systems and our classes. With every new expansion, with every passing year, we added new abilities because that's what you get when you level up. We added new things to earn, new rewards, new systems.
I would argue there's like still a lot of system and class bloat to work on, because it says growing pains from 2010 to 2020. I would say this is like one of the #1 things that people kind of still complain about today with retail, is that you hop in and there's just so much bloat that it's like, what is actually happening, right?
Systems, and this just built on top of itself, one layer after another after another. And where that left us was a place that felt very complex, very unapproachable. And so I think the team started to take a step back and consider how they might do something about this. And one of the big solutions we landed on around the 2014-2016 era, Warlords of Draenor and Legion were the main expansions where this happened, was an initiative that we called ability pruning, the same way you might prune a plant or a tree that's kind of growing out of control to keep it more focused and growing in a healthy way. We went through and we removed a number of our systems. We removed some abilities that players had and gained over the years.
Okay, I just have to pause this. So I think that adding through subtraction is awesome. I love that philosophy. I think it's fantastic. And I think there is a point to have too many abilities, too much bloat, and it sucks. But if you're going to prune, you have to prune the right things. You can't prune the wrong things, the fundamental things, the things that make a class, right? And we all know what I'm talking about here. We're talking about like things like deep freeze. We're talking about things like that improved counterspell. Like on certain classes, there's things that they're too fundamental, right? And I think if you're going to prune, you got to prune correctly. But I think that it is necessary. You can't add forever, and you have to. You eventually do have to remove, right? That's part of it. So yeah.
That were kind of not really about what their core had originally meant to be.
I mean, people are laughing. I'm not making a joke, guys. Like that's like I think they're. You guys might think it's funny, but like they're serious, right? Like imagine getting rid of stealth from Rogue. It's like no, it's like too fundamental, right? We know, yeah. I mean, it's like I'm being serious here. Yeah.
And we're making the classes feel more and more like each other over time, as well as making them harder to learn. We were seeing that our community, our players, were less social than they originally had been. You know, part of the magic of World of Warcraft in 2004 was it was this engine for meeting new people and making connections. People made lifelong friends in World of Warcraft. Some people met their partners and more. And over time, as we had added new types of content to the game, we'd made rewards much more accessible to solo players and small group players. We found that they were drifting away from that content, and the game was starting to feel much more solitary for many of them. And so something that we set out to do, reflecting on how we'd changed the game, was to re-add some exclusivity in certain types of rewards, like the best cosmetic rewards and armor sets, to ensure that if you wanted to get those, you needed to be joining an organized raid group, let's say, and being social, because we felt that that was always a core part of the game. We needed to keep pushing players towards it.
I'm curious what he's going to say next, because diminished social bonds, so players drifting away from organized group gameplay. This was in 2010 to 2020. Now they've drifted the other direction to more solo play, less organized group play, solo shuffle, blitz, pick up groups with mythic pluses, right? It's almost like the opposite philosophy nowadays, because this was 2014, so this was almost a decade ago now, right? I'm curious where he's going to go.
Yet another example. Over time, a lot of the friction that had existed in the early versions of World of Warcraft that made players make choices about their character, what they wanted to specialize in, had been eroded, had been removed. And we found that when players could change their skills very easily, could switch from one loadout to another on the fly, that ultimately they had moved from a world where they had strengths and weaknesses to one where they increasingly only had strengths and could spec out of their weaknesses, so to speak. And so we looked for ways to add some new systems into the game, like artifact weapons in Legion, where you had to pick one of several to really invest your time and energy into building up. And if you wanted to have all of them leveled, they were going to be weaker than if you had specialized in just one, as an example. The idea being, this was always meant to be a role-playing game. And people, in a role-playing game, you're making choices about what you want your character to be good at, what you want your character to be less good at. And that was something that we felt was important. So we were pushing in all of these directions, solving what seemed like design problems that had emerged as the game was evolving. And yet, our players were not thrilled about this, would you believe? And we were reflecting on this and wondering what more we needed to do to recapture something that it felt was slipping away.
Very true.
When we compared how players had played the game in the past and what had been the core identity of the game that we as designers had all been trained by our predecessors to maintain, how do we get that back? Well, we couldn't, ultimately. In 2020, though, a pair of things happened that kind of changed a lot of the team's perspective on how we were looking at these problems and where we were. In the modern game, we released our Shadowlands expansion, And in the run-up to that, we had made some serious commitments to players that we really wanted to move back towards meaningful choice and, characters being different from one another based on your personal investment. And the community was telling us pretty loudly, we don't want this. We hear why you're saying it, but we just don't want it. At the same time,
I remember that.
We had this miraculous opportunity, the wonderful chance to re-release the original classic version of the game, recreated with all of its original systems. And this became this incredible, science experiment, almost a giant A/B test of sorts, where we had been theorizing that player behavior was different because we had drifted away from our vision. Well, here we had a chance to literally re-release the 2004 version of the game. And what we found was that, yes, players still love that version of the game. It's a great game, and it holds up, and it built a strong community. We also found that players playing that version in 2020 played it very differently than they had 15 years prior.
Yeah, we're all much different
Whereas
gamers.
In the past, systems like increasing costs to change your talents around had deterred players from doing that and made them say, you know what, I like PvP and I like raiding with my friends. I'm going to make a build that's pretty good at both, instead of perfect at one and terrible at the other. In 2020, players weren't okay with being suboptimal. And so they actually just spent extra hours earning the gold, grinding that out so that they could change their specialization whenever they needed to always be optimal. And they complained bitterly about it. They're like,
that's super true. That's super true, right? Like back then, that's totally what it would be. Oh, I'm just gonna make a custom build where I can go to my raid and do some damage, but I can also go out and world PvP after the raid with my friends. I don't have 50 gold to respec twice a week. Like back then in 2004, yeah, right. That was fine. Nowadays, no way.
This is the least fun part of Classic, but we have to do it to play the game the way we want to today. In short, it wasn't that we had drifted away from our original vision or somehow failed it. It's that players had changed, and the vision was no longer serving our players in 2020, and so it needed to be updated. So a little the digression to kind of broaden this a little bit. If for anyone here who is working on or thinking about release,
so it's our fault. Yeah, it's our fault. Now, he's kind of right though, right? Like we are different players than we were when we were 12 years old with no responsibilities, no house, kids, whatever, full-time jobs, whatever it is. We're completely different players. Our expectations have completely changed because of globalization, the internet, information exchange at large, right? So we have different expectations, and we're different people than we were 20 years ago. So like he is right, but it is funny the way he says it. It's a player problem, not ours.
Releasing a game that will have an ongoing live service component. If you put that out there and people come to it and are playing it, congratulations, that is an amazing accomplishment. But it's also essential to realize that the moment you release that out into the world, the nature of designing that experience is transformed. Before it was released, it was your vision. It was your thing, your team's thing to craft. Once it's out there and it has become home to some number of players, it is now equally theirs. And it is their world that you need to be a caretaker of, as well as the designer of. Players will have come to the game that you made, not the one you wished you'd made. And if something's out there for a little bit, the people who are drawn to it are going to be the ones who like what that gameplay is. And the people who don't like it are going to be filtered out or repelled. Now, whether this is an entire game, it could also apply to a subsystem in a game, like a class or whatever. Pretend you designed a mode or a class that you intended to be very tactical, methodical, slow-paced, and deliberate in its gameplay. But players came to it and figured out quickly that there was a way to play that thing that was much faster paced, and that you had greater success doing that, and that continued for a few months. The players who are doing that are presumably doing it because they like that gameplay. And if you try to change...
That's not always right. Players will gravitate towards the best way to do something, even if they don't like that thing. They will level the quickest way, even if they're not having fun, because it's quicker. They will play the slow character in a fast-paced way if it's optimal, because it's optimal. It doesn't necessarily mean they like it. They're doing it because it's the best, right? And that's just gaming culture these days.
Change it to what you wanted it to be originally, you are doing a huge disservice to them. You're basically making a change that serves your own vision at the direct expense of what everyone has chosen and has gravitated towards. So it's essential when thinking about design changes to a live game that you do it first and foremost through the eyes of your community, and that you think about what they want and what they don't want. Here's just a brief tangent. So I want to talk a little bit about the concept of desire paths. This is one of my favorite little urban planning things. As you see here, desire paths are a natural phenomenon that you see all around the world. Not just humans, animals create them too. They just reflect the natural, efficient path that people yearn to take to get from one place to another. And if those paths are different than the ones that were laid out and planned, well, you will see what you see here. A dirt path cut through the grass that reflects hundreds and hundreds of people taking this path. I was thinking about trying to come up with a clever visual way of presenting my idea. When I started Googling around, I was delighted to discover that an artist had beaten me to it, so I'm just going to borrow what they did. Here, imagine you see a nice path laid out,
We got a link to
city
the artist.
park or whatnot. Very
What's going
simple,
on?
perpendicular lines, a nice path through nature. Easy. But of course, this is what will happen, as we just saw. People want to get to the corner. Maybe they're catching a bus. Maybe they just want to cross the street quickly. They don't want to take the long path. They're going to take this path. Now let's imagine our urban planner friend had a vision. He had something in mind when creating this, and it did not include this path. So what does he do? Put a bench down. Don't walk this way. And also, if you want to sit and enjoy the nature around you, now you have a bench. You can, rest your legs. This is better, right? No.
No.
People are still going to try to take the path. All right, no, really. Also, stop littering in the park. Throw your stuff out in here and walk on this nice straight path that we made for you. What's the problem? Of course, this is, people are people. This is going to continue as it will.
Yeah.
Okay, for real now.
Oh, come on.
Just let's put this whole hedge here.
No, not the
And honestly,
hedge.
you could imagine this designer reflecting on this and saying, actually, it's a good thing that those paths happened because where we landed is a better overall vision. It's a bit, this aesthetically nicer. It was a bit overly simple before. This is perfect. And maybe it holds up for a little bit, but no. And so here we find ourselves again. So what do you do in this situation as the designer? Well, you embrace what people are telling you and showing you very clearly they want to do. You make that a path that you support. And once you do that, things will be fine. For a while, anyway.
Yeah.
So full credit to the artist
There we
here,
go, credit,
Chaz
yeah.
Hutton. But the moral of the story here is, as a designer,
That's
as a
good, that's
developer,
good, man.
avoid falling into adversarial patterns where you are fighting your players, where you're acting at cross purposes. And also think about the emotion that that's causing in them and what you're aiming to achieve. Put yourself in the shoes of someone who's commuting every day and trying to catch a bus and comes through this park and finds that there are obstacles in their path. How do they feel about the city planners who are doing that? Probably not great. Do you want your players to feel that way about you? Okay, so you've probably seen memes of like the perfect whatever, it doesn't exist, and then there's an example of the thing. I don't have one of those because my hypothesis here is in the context of a live game, truly the perfect design doesn't exist. Now, what I mean by that is, designers and systems designers especially, and I'm very guilty of this, love solving problems. It's part of what probably drew us to design. I think for a long time on World of Warcraft, we tweaked our quest system or our dungeon system or our rewards with the goal and the idea that we could finally solve them. We could finally say, okay, you know what? Dungeons are perfect now. We can stop worrying about this, and we can focus our energies elsewhere and make other parts of the game better. Wouldn't that be great? Unfortunately, players are a little bit more complicated than that.
Yeah.
A couple of examples. So in our Legion expansion, we introduced a big change to how quests work in the world, whereas before you had to go to a town and pick something up from an NPC. In Legion, we added world quests that were just on your map with tons of rewards. And some of these rewards included a new progression system called Artifact Power that gave you open-ended power progression. Players loved this. The first response we got when Legion came out was that this was like a revolutionary improvement to the gameplay loop in World of Warcraft. They wished it had been there all along, and they couldn't get enough of it. And so we looked at this and we said, awesome, we solved questing.
We did it.
Let's do more of this. Let's make this our new formula for what we do next. Well, then Battle for Azeroth, our next expansion, came out a couple of years later, and we were dismayed to discover that the first reaction from players when they saw it was, wait, this again? I've just spent the last 2 years doing this stuff. I was expecting something different.
That's so true.
Another similar example, we introduced a new dungeon system called Mythic Plus with different modifiers and affixes to vary the experience. And initially, super well received. With not many changes other than just adding new dungeons to the pool over time, players a few years later began to tell us, we're tired of this system. It's not working for us anymore. Blizzard needs to overhaul it completely. What we see here is that novelty has inherent value. And if you're trying to come up with a single static solution to an ever-changing dynamic system that is what player psychology is, you're always going to be one step behind. WoW, for example, we went through 8 different iterations of our raid structure over the first 10 years of the game. From 40-player raids to 25, then 25 and 10, then different difficulty versions of them, then combining them, then separating them. We finally landed on 4 different versions with flexible sizes. But at the end of the day, we were changing it. Were we making it better? Like, did we land on a system, by definition, that was better than where we started because we were presumably responding to feedback and improving it? I don't think so. The system that we have today, or that we landed on after 10 years of change, actually wouldn't have worked for our players at the start of World of Warcraft. The raid scene wasn't really large or mature enough. People didn't have the need for multiple raid difficulties and multiple different sizes. We made each of those changes in response to player feedback and what we were seeing and hearing from our players as we went through this journey with them. Just because we changed from A to B doesn't mean that one is better than the other.
This is really enlightening. It's a great perspective. You know, one of the things though that I'm thinking about is, and I hope people don't take this harshly, is oftentimes players don't know what they want, right? Or oftentimes the minority is the one that is speaking the loudest, and there's a majority that's silent. And that seems to be the true difficulty in game dev. Is this a loud minority speaking here? Should I just ignore them? Or is this really what everybody wants? Because if you listen to that super loud minority of players, it could then destroy the game. If you have people on the forums crying about things that they really shouldn't be crying about, and you listen to them, it could actually diminish the game. And differentiating between what the majority of players actually want, which could be a silent majority, and the vocal minority of players that are screaming for like no reason, is a really hard thing to do. That line is really hard to like kind of tell. It's like what's actually going on here? What do players actually want? That seems to be the issue. Right, trying to figure out what players actually want, because you can ask like, oh well, this is what the players wanted, and it's like, well, did they? Right? Did they? And that's tough. It's a little more difficult.
Each was right for its time, for its place. All right, moving on. So if perfect design doesn't exist, what does that mean about balance? Well, I'm also going to say that's a challenge. Fun story from 15 years or so ago when I was a class designer working on the Death Knight class. So Death Knights have a couple of different specializations inspired by the Lich King, the iconic Warcraft character. One focuses on unholy power, another focuses on frost. And so here we see an abstraction of the player data of how much damage these two specializations were dealing in our raid content at the time. Players were very fixated on these numbers, and if you were a player of the Frost specialization, you were complaining to Blizzard at the time and saying, we are super weak, everyone's playing Unholy, I feel dumb for playing Frost, please fix this, please help us. And so as a class designer, I went in, I looked at the numbers, looked at a lot of data, and came up with what seemed like the perfect solution. I'm just going to bring Frost's damage up by just the right percentage to make them right about equal to Unholy. And so we rolled out these changes. Players are very excited. And what did we see a week or two later? We saw this. Frost did indeed go up to where we hoped they would, but Unholy's performance dropped significantly. Why? Well, what happened is players at the time realized that they thought that Frost played perfectly now with the changes might be a tiny, tiny bit better than Unholy. And so the very best players, the ones who cared most about their performance, the ones who crunched the numbers and min-maxed, they switched from Unholy to Frost. That helped bring Frost up, but it also made the average performance of Unholy drop significantly. And so a few weeks passed, and after that, lo and behold, Unholy players were saying, we need help, we're super weak, what's going on here? Remember, we never touched them. But the lesson here is these are dynamic systems.
That's funny.
Another great example of this from a non-World of Warcraft game, StarCraft Brood War, a legendary esport. This game had its last balance patch in 1999, and then continued to be a premier esport, especially in South Korea, for decades to follow. This is data aggregated from thousands of esport level matches from I think 2007 to 2011 or so. And you see the balance between the three major factions in a PvP head-to-head setup fluctuated massively over time with no balance changes.
That is super fascinating to me. 0 balance changes. This is a graph from 2007 to 2011, and the last patch was in 99. So a 4-year change in win rates between Terran, Zerg, and Protoss in Brood War with no changes. So player psychology is just changing. Like, oh, this is the meta build. This is the best build. Oh, wait, no, it's not. This is better. So it's like this constant discovering. Super cool, actually. Very cool.
There were differences in the map pools that the leagues used, but most of this represented players figuring out a new strategy, that changing the meta, then people coming up with a new strategy that in turn countered that. Anyone here who's working on or thinking about?
Dude, as a PvP player, like a longtime PvPer, this always happens too. You play an arena match and you go, that is unbeatable. And then like a few weeks later, maybe you figure it out or someone else figures out a strategy on how to beat it. And you're like, oh, sweet. And now everyone says, your class is unbeatable. But then like a couple more days or weeks go by and then someone figures out a strategy to beat you on your class. And then their class is now, oh, that's unbeatable. And then like this constant rock, paper, scissors that's like being created and crushed and fluctuating all the time until, eventually like many months down the road, you might have this concrete metagame. But then even then, sometimes there's...
place Prime sub goes.
Yeah, thanks for priming, man. Even then, sometimes someone will discover something like a year later that was like dormant the whole time. And this doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes it does, where there's like a spec that was really good the whole time, but no one really knew it, especially in PvP, because PvP, there's no like sims. It's more of like an art. It's like, you don't really know what's good until you actually try it. You can't put it into a computer and to see what's the best. It's like, we got to figure out the strategy and see if it even works, and then try it in the 3v3 setting and then a 10v10 setting. And, I'm digressing, but the point is that's pretty cool. But when you point the finger at Blizzard and say, fix this because this has been OP for 3 days, sometimes I think Blizzard's just sitting there saying like, hold, let's let the players figure out a way to counter it first. Hold, boom, there it is. Okay, someone thought of a counter. Okay, now they're complaining about something new. Hold, and there it is. Someone found a counter. And this is, I think, more true in PvP games like StarCraft, like arenas, like RBGs, whatever. Less true with like Mythic Plus, PvE, raids, because, and maybe a little less true in those cases because you can sim the numbers. The numbers are the numbers. That's how it works nowadays. But yeah, I think there's like this balance of like, if we balance these things too fast, we didn't even give players an opportunity to find that counter, to then find the counter to the counter, to find the counter to the counter to the counter, right? Which is interesting. Someone said, I wish the devs holded more. Sometimes you wish they hold more, and sometimes you wish they hold a little less. It's like, this has been broken for 3 weeks now. I've been getting one shot for 3 weeks. Come on, devs, let's go,
PvP balance in a modern game today If you saw a champion in a game with a 56, 57% win rate, or one with a 43% win rate, those would be like crises that needed to be addressed immediately. And yet, this continued this way for 10 years and self-corrected. Imagine what might have been different if there were a designer actively trying to balance these numbers. Again, if you're thinking about this, from the perspective of trying to find a perfect solution, you have to understand these are dynamic systems, and that may not be possible because just by touching it, you are in fact altering the problem itself. One last piece of data here. So this is a comparison of damage done by all of our different classes in our Cataclysm raid. This is Cataclysm Classic that's on live servers right now, but it's the 2012 version of our game balance and game data exactly recreated. This is the modern raid in the 11.1 patch in War Within, the Undermine raid. So that was then, this is now. That was then, this is now. Clearly, we have gotten better at balance over the last 12 years. These bars are much closer to each other. But at the end of the day, what have we seen? Are players overall much happier about balance? Do they all praise us for having finally balanced the game so well? Turns out we hear roughly the same amount of complaints about balance. And at the end of the day, we've seen no indication that the player who is at the bottom of this list is happier that they're only 4% behind the player at the top than they were 12 years ago when they were 10 or 15% behind. Last is last. And so that brings me to the next point. When dealing with people, when dealing with players in a community, perception is what matters.
I feel like we talked about this like 2 or 3 hours ago at the start of the stream, but being a game dev, I personally would hate being a game dev because you put out a change and say it's a good change and or a somewhat of a good change, and say 60% of the players are actually pretty happy about it. That means 40% of the players are still sending you death threats. And it's like, and then say you put out like a really good change where like 65 or 70% of your player base is like, okay, this is great, or like even 80%. The 20% is still gonna be really loud and saying that you're terrible and that you suck. And it's like, I don't know, man. That seems it's just like brutal. You put you think about something, you put it out there, and it's like, even some of the best things, it's like, people are just hating on it. It's like, oh my gosh, no thank you. Game dev, not for me.
I think a secret for any balance designer, in my opinion, is that in a live game, you're not actually balancing numbers. Your goal is to balance how people feel about those numbers and how people feel about their time playing the game. That can be a much more challenging task than some math. If someone feels like their class or their champion or whatever is weak, that's how they feel. And it doesn't matter whether they're right or wrong. If a systems designer were to come along and say, actually, your class is in the top third overall, is that going to make the player suddenly reevaluate their performance or their experience when they see themselves lagging behind or not being invited to groups? And in the modern era, it doesn't take a whole lot to make players feel weak or not feel great about where they stand. Right? The first thing any content creator will do whenever there's any game or a new patch or an update is make one of these wonderful tier lists. And players will instantly feel that sense of dismay when they see the thing that they prefer, F tier, D tier. And they're not going to feel good about it.
I try my absolute best to never do these, man. Oh my gosh. If you make a tier list, it's instantly getting like 100,000 views on YouTube, guaranteed. Just drop them, people click on them, people watch them. I try my best not to. The reason I try my best not to is you put out a tier list and 1 week later, everything is different anyway. So it's just, you put it out it's just like clickbait. People click on it, eat it up, and then everything changes in a week or two. And then you put out another one and then it's different 2 weeks later anyway. For a few reasons. One, the raid gets changed on mechanics, so things are different. Two, that there's actual buffs or nerfs, which is like the big one. Or like a trinket gets buffed or nerfed, or like there's so many different things that can happen. It's like putting the energy into making one of these is just like, yeah, I usually skip this. It's just like always changing.
So what do we do if balance is impossible? How do we drive perception? I think the biggest thing that we've settled on is rather than seeking a static answer, rather than seeking moving to an endpoint, making frequent touches. Now, whereas in the past we used to do balance patches every few months, probably every 2 weeks or so now, we release a major hotfix that tweaks a number of classes and their abilities in different contexts, with the goal being making sure that we can reassure players that if they're on the bottom right now, that's going to change pretty soon. And if they're looking at whoever's the top dog, thinking that maybe they should re-roll or change their playstyle to the flavor of the month, that, actually Blizzard's probably going to fix that soon too. I should just kind of stick with what I enjoy, and it'll be fine.
Well, that was just kind of my overarching point, right? Like every 2 weeks you're seeing these changes, not all the time, but a lot of the times, and it's like re-rolling your entire spec and character and everything for a 4% damage buff when in 2 weeks there's a majority of the chance that it might change is like, you're better off playing what you like playing, right? That's what I tell players. Like, unless you're going for literal world first, or unless you're going for like literal peak of the peak of the peak of the peak, play what you have fun playing, because chances are it's going to be shaken up in the next couple weeks or months anyway, and then you'll like your time in the game. Like, yeah.
Are we perfect in this? Do we always achieve our results? No. But this is, what we aim to do. And this is the philosophy that guides our balance on a day-to-day basis. And really, what this is about is maintaining players' trust and confidence in the process. And that is, when you can't always be right in every situation, the most important thing for any live game.
I think one of the best ways to handle balance is this. Every class has strengths and weaknesses. And what that means is for a certain class, you're going to have much better AoE. So in a raid, on an AoE fight, you're going to do really well. And you're on a single target fight, you might not do as well. So on each raid, you have an encounter where you feel like this is my fight, right? This is a mage fight, or this is a warlock fight. This is a hunter fight. And you get to kind of shine, right? And similarly, for class design, I like it when some classes can shine in certain areas of the game and not in others. For example, like warriors have been traditionally bad at dueling, but they're really good in PvP at like a battleground or at like an arena a lot of the times, right? So it's like, okay, my class sucks solo, but I'm really good in group. It's like, okay, you have to be able to say, I'm okay with being bad at this thing and good at other things, right? Like, I'm trying to think, like mages, really traditionally good at like AoE fights. Obviously it depends on like the patch and the expansion and the type of fight, blah, blah, blah. But like traditionally like good at AoE. When it comes to fights where you have to move a lot, like not as good as something like, I'm thinking of like in Season of Discovery, like a Ret Paladin, or like a warrior with Ashbringer where you can move. Obviously you're going to outperform on a fight where you have to move as a caster, right? I'm just like speaking off the top of my head, but that's okay. I'm saying there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I think that's actually a good thing. I think it's good to have weaknesses in a class and to be okay with those weaknesses because you know that your class has strengths and those strengths are right around the corner. And that's part of creating a game that like feels exciting and meaningful because it's like, I have my weaknesses, but I also have my strengths. I get my time to shine, right? But I think it's problematic when the game design philosophy gets to a point where every class has to be good at everything. And that's where homogenization comes in. And I think that's where you start to get more problems. I think more problems work that, like, start to work themselves. Or I think more problems start to arise that way when you try to balance absolutely everything in every way. And it's like, now everyone has this expectation that you need to be able to do absolutely every form of content at a peak level, every boss at a peak level, or else it's just like meaningless. And I think that's been a problem.
For any ongoing game, trust is the fundamental currency of the entire ecosystem. When we ask players to spend time in our world, we're asking them to spend the most valuable thing they have, their time, with us. And I think, if you look at the discourse around whether a game is a dead game online, which is everywhere these days, I think at the root of that is players' anxiety that maybe their time is being spent in a place that in the long run will be unwise, and that they're going to regret. And certainly if it feels like a development team is out of touch and isn't going to look after their interests and isn't going to respect their time, again, why would they spend their time there? And so maintaining trust through everything we do is absolutely essential. We know we're not always going to get it right. Sometimes we're missing some piece of data.
I completely agree with this. You want to make sure that your time doesn't feel like it's wasted. And now, let's piss a bunch of people off. You guys ready for this? Let's piss a bunch of people off. It just needs to be said. LOL. No, it's true though, man. Look, someone wrote this in my Twitch chat yesterday. I actually wrote it down because I thought it was so good. Someone said this. I saw the BFA video, and during it you were talking about how you know people who stopped mount farming because of Remix. That's me, LOL. I used to farm mounts all week long. Now I don't at all, because I'm just well, they'll probably release a Wrath remix, and they'll probably release a Legion remix. What a bummer for the collectors. It seems pointless when Remix is so free. I said this when Remix came out. Everyone completely hated on me. Completely hated on me. And we're starting to get more and more comments like this of like, wait, crap. And so to relate it back to what Ian just said, if you want to maintain player trust, I think things like this need to be kept in mind. All right. Player trust comes with not saying this acquisition is through this. Oh, wait, no, it's through this. That makes players feel like they're getting baited and you're swapping things. And to me, that's not a good thing, right? So anyway, I know. So if you're upset about that, you can cry about it. But I feel like the truth needs to be said, right? It still needs to be said. I still need to be that voice. I feel like I watched Andor season. Actually, crap. I don't want to say the scene because it would be spoilers. So never mind. I watched that scene in Andor season 2 towards the end. No spoilers. No spoilers. If you saw Andor season 2 towards the end, the speech, you guys know what I'm talking about. You guys know what I'm talking about. It needs to be said. All right, I'll be the one. I'll take the hate. I'll say it. I'll say the truth. All right, there it is. Andor season 2, man, it was good. Anyway.
Sometimes we're just going to make the wrong guess as to what players will do in response to something that we put out there. Sometimes, given the diversity of our community, it's literally impossible to please both sides. If there are two groups that want literally directly opposing things, we're going to have to disappoint one of them more often than not. But what we can do is act very quickly when we realize that we have gone astray, so that when something is off, players' reaction ideally is, hey, this isn't it, but I'm sure Blizzard will fix this, as opposed to, wow, these developers are out of touch. Do they even play their own game? And that's not to say that we can't continue to improve in this space, but that is our aim in how we communicate and how we think about the decisions we make. Transparency here can be really scary. Admitting that you were wrong, admitting that you missed something to a community when there's people looking to pick that apart is challenging, it is daunting. But in the long run, I think it's the only way to maintain trust, and you need to maintain trust for there to be a long run. Speaking of that, I'm
going to go back just a second. There's a lot of good points on this slide. This number 3 point is why I think it would be so hard to be a dev. With a diverse community, sometimes it's literally impossible to get it right for everyone. You have some of the community saying this, some of the community saying that, and they're fighting against each other. It's like, what is going on? Who do I listen to here? It seems really hard to get it right. Or impossible. It's impossible to get it right, right? And so for that, like, devs have my respect. It's like, bro, I wouldn't want that job. That seems so hard to get that right. You know what I mean? And I agree, like, in the long run, you want that trust. You want that transparency of like, look, we messed up. And I think Blizzard has been doing better with that the last couple of years than they did the many years before that. So I will give them that. There is definitely a sense of improvement there, but could maybe still have more improvement. But it has gotten better. If people played through like 2014 to 2020 era, definitely feels much different than 2021 to 2025 era in terms of the transparency and communication. Like, it definitely does feel different. Yeah.
a long run. Speaking of that, a lot of the way we used to think about these decisions, and a lot of the stuff that my talk that I had begun to work on 5 years ago was evaluating things, was looking at the longevity of systems and how you consider the future and how important it is to plan ahead when you're making a live service game that you expect and intend to last for years. And back then, we were looking at what seemed like some very real design problems. Here we see the original World of Warcraft talent tree from World of Warcraft Classic. You got 51 talent points to spend as you level to 60. Pretty simple, pretty iconic. But that basic premise of getting 1 point per level meant that with each new expansion, when the level cap went up to 70, you got 10 new points. There had to be 10 points to spend things on. When the cap went up to 80, you got 10 more points. And so a few years later, our trees looked like this. And this was just 2 expansions in. And we were beginning to plan expansion 3, expansion 4, and realizing, like, whoa, what do we, like, at some point, the UI here is a mess. This is so complex for players. It's a nightmare to balance. This is unsustainable. We need to change the system. And so we did. One of the things we did moving into our Mists of Pandaria expansion was to look at our big talent tree and say, you know what, actually, probably like 50 of the points people are spending here, they're just copying some build online anyway. Everyone gets these points. Let's just give them to you baseline so that you don't have to make that decision. And let's simplify and streamline and focus on the interesting decisions that are being made between utility or playstyle.
Out of all things of Mist of Pandaria, I love the expansion. That was great. Those new trees were one of the things that still, 12 years later, I still disliked. I would have rather had the old trees, right? I liked Mist of Pandaria. I liked the gameplay. I liked the PvP. But those new trees, just simplifying, oh, let's just pick one of these three, one of these three, one of these three. It's like, that was probably one of the negatives.
Options. And you'll have everything that you used to, but the UI is much more elegant. It's much more maintainable. And as we look ahead, we can add 1 new row every expansion as needed, and we can keep doing that for a long time. This felt like a strictly superior system, viewed through that design lens. Players were getting everything they previously had, and it was going to be extensible in a way that the old system wasn't. In fact, the systems designers who built the original 2004 talent system, when they saw this, they were working on other projects at Blizzard at the time, they sent over huge praise. They're like, this is amazing. We wish we'd done this 8 years ago. Great job. And then it turned out players kind of hated it.
Yep. That's so true, man. They put it out there and we're all just like, what did they do, man? What did they do? And then, so modern WoW is back to like the old trees, which I love. Again, I think they're great. The old trees are a bunch of... Guys, even if it's the illusion of choice, it still feels like you're making some choice. Still feels like, oh, my Frostbolt's quicker now. Cool. Even if it's an illusion of choice, it's still choice. It's like... So, yeah, they went back to the old one.
Why? Because what we had done was optimize for the long run. But what had happened was that leveling no longer felt rewarding. It no longer felt meaningful. You leveled up, and you didn't get a talent point to spend. In some cases, you basically got nothing. Maybe you got 1 thing every 10 levels. That was not adequate. And it was a resounding point of feedback. People either said they specifically didn't like the talent system, or they just, leveling felt dull and they couldn't put their finger on why. And so what we had done was, again, optimize for something at the expense of players' experience today. And if it's not fun today, if the thing you're not making isn't fun right now, will there even be a tomorrow? And so we had to take a big step back and reconsider, how we were weighing these things and what was worth it and what wasn't. And so we redid our talent system again in 2022 for our Dragonflight expansion.
Which I loved that.
We moved back to something that actually looked a lot like the original system.
Yeah, I was so happy about this.
We had a bit more horizontal progression in it. We tried to solve some of the problems that made the original one collapse under its own weight very quickly. But we committed to once again giving players 1 point every level. And as we built this system, we looked at it and we could say, we know this can't last forever. after enough years, there will be too many points. This will once again collapse under its own weight, and we'll have to do something about it. But you know what? That's okay, because it's fun today, and it's going to be fun tomorrow. And down the line, we'll figure that out when we get there. Because the alternative, there may not even be a then.
Dang! Wow! I generally don't like that philosophy of we'll figure out tomorrow then. I generally don't like that philosophy, but I think in this case he's actually right, where like people love these talent trees. When they put them back in, by and large, everyone was like praising it. Like, finally, we're back to talent trees. And this was 3 years ago now. And I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I personally still love them way better. So I think they're great. And I do think that is true with eventually they kind of collapse onto themselves, right? So they added a hero talent tree in the middle now. And they'll probably be swapping out those hero talent trees. But that is like a design issue. But I generally don't like the philosophy of like, oh, we'll worry about tomorrow. It's like, I don't know.
And so really, yeah, you have to carefully consider, you need to think about the future, but don't be scared of or overly intimidated by it, because players are focused on every time they're logging into your game, every time they're hearing news about it, what you're offering them now. No one's having more fun today because the design elegance is going to pay off 5 years down the line. That's not how a community ever thinks.
That's fair.
Nor will they.
Definitely.
So sometimes you see the problems, but you go ahead anyway, because it's what the right thing for your community is. And we often joke on the team these days, sometimes we'll say, like, that's a problem for Future Us. Future Us is going to be really smart, and they'll solve it when they get there. And honestly, to some extent, there's merit in that. As we've discussed in other contexts in this talk, things change.
I still don't know if I like that philosophy. I maybe I'll have to sit with that a little bit more. But I don't like that philosophy. I like the opposite philosophy in the sense of like, let's set ourselves up for success in the future, and today's present is the future of yesterday. And it's like, so we're living in a world that we created that we like. But I think he has a good point, right? If you think too much in the long term and it's just like cutting the short term down over and over and over, that's, I mean, your player base is like, what are you doing? We don't care about how the tree is going to look 5 years from today. We want to have it fun now. So I get what he's saying. Like, maybe I'll have to wrestle with it a little bit more. But generally speaking, I'm such the opposite type of a guy. I'm like that 5 to 10 year down the road kind of a thinker. Like, what's the best choice for 10 years from now kind of a thing. That's generally how my brain works. And so for me, that thing is just like, let the me of tomorrow worry about it. Like, bro, that kind of thinking is scary, man. It gives me anxiety, right? It's like,
change so quickly, so chaotically over time, that if you think you know what problems you're going to be facing 2 years from now, let alone 5 years from now.
No, you guys are right. It's a balancing act. You can't over-design for the future at the cost of your experience today. That's totally right. It's especially with in the future things change, so you'll have a new set of tools to handle the future problems, right? So I think that's completely true. I'm not trying to take away from that. I'm just saying, like, the way my brain works with my psychology, I'm just like, gives me a lot of anxiety to push things, right?
You're probably kidding yourself a little bit. You're going to be facing all kinds of unexpected challenges. This one that you can see coming, that you can start planning for years ahead of time and already be thinking about, you already have a leg up with that one. So one exception to this, though. There's one area where I think it is important to really stress the future. And that is a set of decisions that I call one-way ratchets, which is like a wrench that you can only turn in one direction and it just won't, go back, like this visual here. And you think about that in terms of the player psychology impacts of certain decisions. If you are increasing the reward of something significantly, if you are removing a long-standing restriction, that's not something you can experiment with lightly, because going in one direction and then trying to reverse it is going to leave players much, much more unhappy than where you started. You can't really take things like that away or reimpose restrictions because, again, that's not how people are evaluating.
James Clear has a really good quote about decisions that can be reversed should be made quickly, and decisions that are irreversible or very hard to reverse should be made very slowly, right? And that's from Atomic Habits. It's like, if you can go back on it, yeah, try it, see if it works. Maybe it's great. If it doesn't, switch back, be flexible. That's great. But if it's something that's gonna, screw you over, like you can't get out of it in the long run, like really make sure that's the road you want to go down, right? In life, those are things like marriage, where you live, your career, stuff like that, which technically can move, or there's divorce or whatever, but like things that are either hard to reverse or impossible to reverse are very, you want to think about those things, right? And then things that you can reverse easily, it's okay, let's make those decisions quickly, and we can always course correct as we go. So anyway, that reminds me of this discussion quite a bit.
The relative value of their experience today. And so to be a responsible steward of this live game, you have to move very carefully and cautiously in these situations. Again, it's not to say never do them. It's not to say never remove restrictions, never be super generous with some of your offerings. But understand that there are some things that you just can't take back. So one example of something that we're applying this to right now is the rules governing playing with opposite faction players in World of Warcraft. So World of Warcraft has had Alliance and Horde as these two opposing factions since the very, very beginning. And in the beginning, they were just the enemy, period. You could never do anything with them. You could never talk to them. If you were on a PvP server, they were just kill on sight, the end. But over time, we got more and more feedback from our players that were in large online communities that had tons of real-life friends. Hey, I'm talking to these people all the time on Discord, on whatever. Why can't I just invite my friend to my raid to play with me just because they happen to pick a different faction 10 years ago? Would that really hurt anything? And looking at this, we asked ourselves, like, would it? And maybe is the answer. There's 20 years of systems and assumptions and social dynamics built upon this system. And we can't totally predict what changing it will do. And we also know this is very much a one-way ratchet. There's no world where we could tell players, okay, you can now play with all of your friends of the opposite faction, and then suddenly decide a few months later, whoops, never mind, that was a mistake, we're going to undo it. That friend you played with yesterday, we have to tell them that you can't anymore.
And flying, right? You can't take away flying anymore. It's like, that's in the game. It's a one-way ratchet. You can't take away transmog. We have collectors, right? So like, there's a lot of this stuff in the game that people are like, oh, let's go back. It's like, you can't go back. You open Pandora's box. It's staying there. It's like, it's like Lost. If you've seen Lost, you can't go back, man, right?
And so what do? We move slowly and gradually in this direction. We first allowed specifically real-life friends who knew each other to play together in dungeons or raids. So if you had someone that you had an existing connection with, you could invite them to your group. That went okay. We then moved one step further and allowed those people to join cross-faction guilds. And this is continuing to this day. And players admittedly have been frustrated by how slow that pace has been. They wished we just kind of jumped to the end of the line and given them all of it right away. But I think to be responsible as stewards of the game, knowing that this was a one-way path, we had to take one step at a time, but we are continuing in the direction that our players are signaling clearly to us they want to go. And so wrapping up, meeting players where they are and serving a community, is about viewing all of these decisions through a player-first, player-focused approach. It's prioritizing player problems over design problems, doing the things that matter to them as opposed to the things that bother you, avoiding falling into adversarial design patterns with your players, staying very agile, recognizing that humans, these are chaotic systems, and you're not going to find a static, perfect solution. But as long as you're moving quickly and you're responding to what you're seeing and hearing, you're going to be closer to what is best at a given moment in time. Nurture and maintain and safeguard and do everything you can do to build trust with your community and to reciprocate it. And as you make decisions, think about the future, but make sure that what you're building is fun today and is serving your players today. Thank you.
There's a lot to cover in this last slide. I I enjoyed that. I think it. I hope you guys enjoyed that with me. It helped me understand kind of. I can see Blizzard playing all of this out. I think the I get the philosophy and I understand it, and it makes sense, and you know, maybe it is the right thing. There are some notes that I would take with this last slide. Like, so one of the first is, and we talked about all these, but I'll try to summarize it. One of the first that's scary about serving a community is one, everyone wants different stuff. And Ian mentioned this, right? It's hard to serve a community when everyone wants different stuff. And like that, so that you're gonna, when you say like prioritize player problems, or, you know, try to serve the community, meet players where they are, it's like, well, whenever everyone wants different stuff, that becomes very difficult, right? And that's fine. It's always gonna be that way. But then 2 is the problem of the vocal minority, right? And when you have a vocal minority, you become, it's this issue where it's like, am I going to listen to the people that are crying the loudest, even if that's not the majority, what the majority wants? Because there's vocal minority, there's that silent majority that's just kind of playing the game and sitting there. How do you distinguish between the two? So that certainly seems to be an issue with serving a community. And then 3, I think we talked about this too, the balance of today and tomorrow. Right? If you do something that really gets players excited today, like you give everyone 1,000 gold for free or 10,000 gold for free, everyone's like, sweet, I got 10,000 gold, but now the price of everything goes up because there's double the gold in the economy or whatever, you know, you see what I'm trying to get. It's not just like making people happy. It's about making sure that the community is actually going to last and sustain itself. And I think you can have that, you can have a balance. Making people happy today it would be easy, right? Like, it's like, well, you just, you know, like that's not what it's all about. I think it's balancing about, let's make sure this thing is actually standing up tomorrow too, right? And it goes both ways. You could say the same thing. If you focus only on tomorrow, then everyone today is just like, bro, what are you doing? Right? So that's why number 3, balancing today and tomorrow. I think too far in either direction is problematic, right? And I know this because I'm a thinker that I think too much probably about tomorrow, and that's probably one of my own faults, and I could probably focus on thinking more about today, and that's one of the things that like, it's like definitely, right? But Blizzard might have the opposite problem, where they might be thinking maybe a little bit too much about today and not enough about tomorrow, right? And anyway, balancing those, once again, balancing it. But I think these 3 points, when everyone wants different stuff, there's vocal minorities that cause issues, and balancing today and tomorrow are still kind of in the back of my mind even after watching this video, even though it kind of helps summarize it. But man, still really enjoyed the video, really enjoyed the upload. Thanks for sharing. This was a talk from Nordic Game, live from Theater Stage yesterday or the day before. So pretty sweet. Well, I don't know, guys. If we're 4.5 hours into the stream still doing reacts, this is phenomenal. Dalva, thanks for the tier 1 sub. Dark, thanks for the tier 1. Sarther, thanks for the prime. Mufaso, thanks for the prime. Desecrady, thanks for the prime. Brandy, thanks for the tier 1. Jay Rich, thanks for the prime. Tim, thanks for the prime. Aska, thanks for the tier 1. I try not to say thank you to subs like mid video, because I would constantly be pausing and be like, thanks for the sub, thanks for the sub. So after videos, I try to like go through and be like, thank you guys for supporting. You own. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Captain Silverstock, thanks for the prime. What is this conference? I don't know. Nordic Game Conference, I guess. What's the add-on nerf? I guess add-ons are being nerfed. Combat add-ons like Omnibar, cooldown trackers, stuff like that. Legacy Warrior? Nah, it could be Legacy Wizard. All right, let's see if Mop is up. If Mop is up, let's play. If Mop is not up, then we'll play some Legacy. Since we're 4.5 hours in with no gaming. Mop is still down, so let's go play Legacy. Yeah, Legacy hard.